National Economic Council host Forum on Human Capital Development is Thursday, chaired by Vice President Yemi Osinbajo. Central Bank of Nigeria CBN false misleading report on payment of overseas tuition, and all extends losses as recession fears mount. This is Business Express on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Leah Katung, Babatunde. We begin with news that the Federal Executive Council has approved the repeal of the Produce Enforcement of Standards Act of 2004 and the enactment of the Federal Product Inspection Service Bill 2022. State House correspondent Jide Onifade reports.
Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Leah, says the justification for the memo is primarily to have an all-encompassing produce inspection regime in Nigeria that is capable of ensuring the best practices in the export of produce from the country.
The old law, the original law was, enacted in 1950, and then it was renewed in 2004. And we believe that it is time for it to be brought up to date, and that is what we have done. And Council approved that it be. It's approved it, and it will be passed on to the National Assembly. Council directed that the Attorney General and Minister of Justice transmit it to the National Assembly.
He also speaks on the second memo he presented to the Council.
The second memo that we brought was for Council to approve the award of contracts for consultancy services for the pre-development of the Funtua Integrated Textile and Garment Park in Katsina State, and for the Medical Tourism Park in Lekki Special Economic Zone in Lagos State, in a total sum of about 1.4 billion naira.
The minister says government is getting the private sector involved in the management and development of the Kano and Calabar economic zones.
Today, we brought to Council a memo for an ENSITF by which the operations will now be digitalized. Both the payments that are put in from any of their stations, they have 56 branches and 11 regional offices. So in the comfort of your office, you can pay.
The International Monetary Fund IMF says it has downgraded projection for growth in April this year for 143 countries, which is 86% of global GDP. The IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, said these at the World Economic Forum meeting on global outlook. She said that 2022 is going to be tough, noting that there is commodity price shock in many countries, particularly soaring food price. She said 3.6% is the IMF's prediction, and it is long way down to global recession, admitting that there will be recession in some countries that are highly dependent on imports from Russia, as well as weaker economic environment.
What can be done is, first, for richer countries to stick to their pledges to support low-income countries. Two, for institutions like mine to, in relative terms, step up support for those who most need it. Last year, we did $650 billion new allocation of special drawing rights. This year, we are doing for the first time a massive transfer of special drawing rights from countries like France. They don't need this so much.
The National Economic Council, chaired by Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, is hosting an international forum to launch the Integrated Regional Human Capital Development Strategy. The conference, scheduled for Abuja, will have in attendance leaders in the public and private sectors across the ECOWAS sub-region reviewing strategies on human capital development, while the launch of the integrated strategy document will be high point of the event. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has urged improved cooperation among West African countries to address the issues of healthcare access, out-of-school children, among other human development indices. The Vice President stated this when he received the Prime Minister of Guinea-Bissau, Nuno Gomez Nabiam, on a courtesy visit to the presidential villa. Oil prices fell 2% in early trade this Thursday, extending losses from the previous day as investors worried that aggressive U.S. interest rate hikes could trigger a recession and dent fuel demand. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell $2.39 or 2% to $103.80 a barrel. Brent crude futures dropped 2% to $109.50 a barrel. Both benchmarks tumbled around 3% on Wednesday to hit their lowest levels since mid-May. Investors are continuing to assess how worried they need to be about central banks potentially pushing the world economy into recession as they attempt to curb inflation with interest rate hikes. Still with energy, the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria and the Association of Distributors of Petroleum Products at the top have resolved to continue selling petrol at the government-approved price of 165 naira per litre. Both associations have also engaged a consortium to ascertain the actual breeding cost and differentials owed its members by the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Agency. Lydia Sampson reports that this is the result of the intervention by the NNPC.
Seamless operations in the downstream subsector of the oil and gas industry has continued to be challenged by the hike in diesel price due to a global supply shock occasioned by the Russian-Ukraine conflict. In Nigeria, transportation of petroleum products across the country had been limited, with marketers barely coping as tank farm owners had allegedly increased prices. However, the two associations say that is now water under the bridge.
That IPMAN, the National Executive Council, have reached out to PPMC, have also reached out to relevant government agencies, and they have assured us, and they have even started, as of yesterday, even as I speak now, massive loading is ongoing in Lagos. It's a matter of days, all this thing will normalize.
Because we are the people that invested our money, and anybody that makes his investment, he needs a returns. And the federal government is doing well. As of now we are talking, you will witness a lot of some states have started having queue of petroleum in filling station.
For the stakeholders, it is time for the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority to engage the marketers and transporters more proactively to stabilize the downstream.
There are also some mitigating factors that must be and should be addressed. So we are calling on the midstream and downstream to please step up, come to the table. You have some data. Our members have some documents. Let's come to the table, discuss these things, reconcile them.
They are optimistic that with the quick, holistic approach deployed by the NNPC and other stakeholders, the queues will soon fizzle out completely. In Abuja, Lydia Sampson, NTA News.
A new World Bank report says the war in Ukraine has led to the largest commodity price shock since the 1973 oil crisis and likely going to elevate prices for years to come. Energy prices have risen above 500% so far in the year 2022, while prices for food and fertilizer rose significantly, not leaving out prices of gas and other commodities. We cannot exhaust the discussion on the impact of the war given the enormity of that crisis. Now, can we? So today we're getting perspectives from Dr. Mukhtar Imam, Dean, Faculty of Management, Communications and Social Sciences, Penn Resource University, Gombe. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
So, how is Gombe this morning?
Very well.
Okay, great. So perhaps the worst impact is on food prices, making it the everyday basic of life. What is worsening that situation in Nigeria when we look at the crisis between Ukraine and Russia, and perhaps the rising food prices and food security crisis that we're looking at?
Well, thank you very much. Very quickly, just provide a bit of context to the conversation here for the benefit of your viewers. You see, the same natural response that humans give to any kind of threat situation that in economics is referred to as the unknown is exactly what happens to or faces economies or markets as well. An example of that would be the case of the pandemic, for example, where we saw the pandemic hit us hard, and people were taken aback, and people were thrown into wearing masks and all of that. This is exactly what happens when there is a volatility in the markets, and volatilities can be caused by all kinds of shockwaves. The current war between Russia and Ukraine is having no doubt a huge dent, a huge adverse effect on economies and markets all over the world, including what you have just talked about, cost of food, commodity prices, and so on and so forth. The war, no doubt, has had a huge toll, like I said, on world economies. And the reason why that is so is because of the growing interdependence amongst nation states. Today, world economies have been intertwined, and so therefore, where there is a shock wave in one part of the world, it literally affects other parts of the world. This war has affected the commodity markets, like we mentioned. It has affected the financial market. It has affected trade relations among countries within the international system. And Nigeria, no doubt, is faced with its own crisis, internal squabbles, internal challenges or contradictions, even before COVID and even before the war in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. So you see that economies all over the world. For example, Lebanon is a country that imports 80% of its wheat from Ukraine. That has been stalled as a result of the embargoes and counter embargoes and so on and so forth that has been placed on Russia. Trading routes have been blocked as a result of these factors. And this has no doubt affected trade relations among countries, especially, like we said, countries that are dependent on either Ukraine for wheat or sunflower oil, just like we have the case of India, for example, or countries that are dependent on Russia. And by the way, a lot of countries are dependent on Russia for energy supply. And
okay, so Doctor, if I may come in here, of all these effects that you have mentioned, the IMF is seeing that a larger chunk of global GDP will experience some shrink this year and a possible recession. The World Bank has also predicted that we're going to have an additional 1 million Nigerians move into the poverty bracket. Now, if we're looking at support for the poor, when we're seeing more people getting poorer, what should be done to provide targeted support to households that will likely be affected and will be facing higher food and energy prices?
Well, no doubt about that. You see, this is something that's already playing out. The United Kingdom, for example, is faced with, I think, a heightened 9.1% inflation, the highest that they've seen in the last 4 decades. This tells you how very tremendous this effect, or the effect of the war, is and might be over the years on particularly low-income economies, like you have talked about the case of Nigeria. It is not going to be an easy fix, forgive me, and there is no silver bullet to the crisis situation. Economies, just like the low-income economies like Nigeria, are faced with this crisis. Now, the truth of the matter is that, like I said, even before the pandemic and the war, we have been faced with food insecurity in this country. And this is as a result of the crisis, the internal squabbles or contradictions that exist here. Yes, no doubt there is the need to ensure that more funds are put into economies, particularly low-income economies. But these funds are not going to come so easy. In the new world order in which we are today, It is about Europe first, and we must understand this. Concessionary or non-concessionary loans are not going to come easy to us. So we must find the way internally to begin to solve the problems very quickly and rapidly. For example, Nigeria is a country with 40% of the world's arable land. What stops us from utilizing that? We can feed the world. You will never hear about a food lot. Now, this is what national economies need to begin to do. Secondly, there is the need to ensure that macro-prudent frameworks are put in place so that institutions that are monetary institutions, in particular central banks of emerging economies, will ensure that sufficient or improved monetary policies are in place for the economies to be able to withstand such shocks, because perhaps this is not the last we're seeing of this conflict, and this might have a significant toll on us. Nigeria, for example, had in the last 2 years, if I recall correctly, over 40,000 hectares of land have been abandoned in northern Nigeria. This is the place that's supposed to be the food basket of the country. And so, again, the IMF brought out a report that Nigeria is facing an over 16% inflation in food. So it's basically a huge crisis. And like I said, these interventions are not going to come in very quickly. And part of the things that need to be done is that the governments within the countries that are mostly affected need to rise up to the occasion and ensure that small and low medium businesses are taken care of. Because when you look at 5 of the 50 most successful businesses in the world today, they started as small or low medium businesses. Our population, 65% of our population are in the blue-collar job sector, meaning these are people who go out on a daily basis, make a living for their family. So the government needs to do a lot more in terms of ensuring that funds, for example, the case of the National Economic Sustainability Plan, intervention funds get to the target population, and that they are not just kept at the middle for the lieutenants and superintendents in the civil service to continue to fill their pockets. And there is no meaningful development that can come to this country without the subnationals. State governors have to do a lot more. This is not the time where you give people wheelbarrows and shovels and axes and ask them to go to the farm. You're not making agriculture, you're not incentivizing it enough for young people to find it lucrative enough to go into. So these are some of the measures, low-hanging fruits that must be tapped into if we are to make any meaningful headway out of the crisis situation that we're in.
Okay, Doctor, then while we try to look at these issues, the food crisis, of course, is being exacerbated by the energy crisis we have and we're facing. Though we're seeing little efforts here and there trying to make the queues disappear, but what would be a lasting solution to the fuel queues we have and their attendant consequences if these queues are addressed?
Long term, we need to have functioning refineries. There is no way a country like Nigeria, with the population that we have, with the resources we have, 1 out of every 4 African is a Nigerian. Nigeria, every state of this country has at least one mineral resource on the commercial level at commercial quantity. These are things we need to begin to explore. Block leakages, ensure that the level of rot and corruption going on in the country is curbed. And most importantly, let's do away with the hedge we're calling subsidy. Use these funds to begin to revamp our refineries. But side by side that, there's a need for a social psychological reorientation, because no matter how brilliant these policies seem, they eventually end up not working as a result of the condition of the average Nigerian, the person who's on the table, who's supposed to fix this problem, and so on and so forth. Look at the crisis that we faced in the last 8 to 10 years, either of subsidy scam or of monies that have been set aside for revamping our refineries and have not been utilized, or of something of that nature. So this is what we need to do. We need to have a functioning refinery. It's not enough to say Dangote has a refinery and that is sufficient. Dangote, for crying out loud, is a businessman. He's not Father Christmas. So the government needs to be in the lead. Even though the Petroleum Industry Act has been signed and is in play, a lot needs to be done. We have to see the government take the lead. Government has to take charge. Else, we're going to continue to be in this circle of having fuel prices drop. And as a matter of fact, energy security is very crucial. Even
Okay,
though we're
Doctor,
trying to
let me
face that
just
against.
chip in this last question. I'm told we don't have time, but if you could be as brief as possible, what will be the priority action to help the producers of various commodities be more responsive to global circumstances like the one we have now?
Well, the things that need to be done is exactly what we'll be talking about. Ensure that all of the value chains of agriculture are explored, from production to processing to manufacturing, because manufacturing is actually where the money is. So we need to ensure that people who produce have a way of storing the commodity they produce. You go to villages and see people who produce tomato, and they are begging people to buy for half the price for which they put it, because they do not have the preservatives. They do not have the facility to help preserve these commodities. And the list goes on and on and on. So a lot needs to be done in terms of channeling resources to these areas so that we will be able to recoup monies. I'll give you a classical example before we end. Sierra Leone, or one of the countries, Ivory Coast or so, is the highest producer of cocoa in the world. Switzerland is the highest producer of chocolate in the world. As at the last count 2 years ago, the income between the both countries stands at around 20.2 billion US dollars, with Switzerland taking the largest portion of it. Why? Because they are investing so much in manufacturing. This is what government needs to do.
Okay, Dr. Imam Mukhtar Imam from the Dean Faculty of Management, Communications and Social Sciences, Penn Resource University, Gombe. Thank you for sharing your time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Do have a nice day. Next is surviving COVID-19.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
I'm into dispatch work, I do delivery, but this one mainly is a medical logistics service. That is this particular kind of service I'm rendering. During COVID-19, it was a very challenging time. That is not the experience is all over, that it affected most businesses. You know, there were no movements. Even if there is a movement, it was restricted. So, and stuff like that, it really affects commercial businesses all over, and including this our business, because that time, even if you have customers, you can't get access to them, because after the ban have been lifted, there is free movement and everything. The system come back to normal again, and the system is working again. I've not really heard about it, and during the COVID, we heard that they are giving loans, but it's, let me just say, the information is not circulated. You understand? The information is not circulated. It's restricted to some and people that are close to you. But to me, I did not participate. As if there's something like that going on, and is real. It really affected us then. So if we benefit from it now, it's not a crime.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
We'll move over to the stock market now to tell you that the stock market closed on a positive note this Wednesday for the second time this week. The all-share index appreciated by 0.56% to settle at 51,377.21 basis points. 229.36 million shares valued at 3.196 billion naira in 4,536 deals were traded by investors. Owando, FCMB and UBA were the top traders by volume. It is on that note that the market opened this morning. We move to the global market scene.
European stocks were lower Thursday as global markets see renewed volatility after a brief recovery following last week's tumultuous trading. DAX was unchanged. FTSE dipped 0.88% and CAC 0.58%. Chinese stocks led gains in a mixed trading session in Asia Pacific as investors continue to monitor recession concerns on Thursday. Mainland Chinese market struggled for direction initially but closed in the green. The Shanghai Composite was up 1.52% at 3,316.92. Hong Kong Hang Seng Index briefly rose 1.69%, and in Japan, the Nikkei 225 was mildly higher at 26,171.25. U.S. stock futures declined early Thursday after the major indices slipped into the red at the end of regular trading, and investors weighed the likelihood of a recession after Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell acknowledged it's a possibility. The S&P 500 futures fell 0.34%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average futures skipped 0.3%, and Nasdaq 100 futures dropped 0.3%, while figures are yet to roll in for African markets. Boss said the Able Business Express.
And this is where we end this episode of the program. Don't forget, you can access all previous episodes on YouTube on the NTA's channel. You can also communicate with us via our social media handles. We value your feedback, so do join us again Friday. Keep the comments, questions, and suggestions coming. The program returns at 3 p.m. My name is Leah Katung. Babatunde.